Good morning. It's Friday, the 3rd of January. You're tuned in to our 10 a.m. newscast coming to you from ARIRANG's news center in Seoul. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. A day after the North Korean leader's seemingly conciliatory gesture towards the south, President Park Geun-hye says she will seek a breakthrough in relations with North Korea. Seoul's defense chief, however, orders the military to stay on alert. Ahead of the winter's peak power consumption period, 3 of the country's nuclear plants will return to operation after they were suspended for 7 months for containing parts with fake quality certificates. Plus, security forces in Iraq are fighting Sunni jihadists in the country's west who claim to have been politically marginalized by the Shia-led government. Will the new year bring about a new era in inter-Korean relations? President Park Geun-hye says she will make greater efforts in 2014 to realize peace on the Korean peninsula. Her remarks came during a phone conversation with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on Thursday, one day after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, in his New Year's address, delivered an unexpected conciliatory message to South Korea. President Park also said that no country should be allowed to hurt regional neighbors by breaching trust, and urged the UN chief to help pave the road for global peace and cooperation. Those remarks are seen by many as a rebuke of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who last week visited the highly controversial Yasukuni war shrine. South Korea's defense chief, however, has warned the country needs to better prepare for possible provocations from Pyongyang, despite the conciliatory tone of Kim Jong-un's New Year's message. Meeting with military brass on Thursday, Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin emphasized the importance of enhancing Seoul's defense capabilities. His remarks followed the North Korean leader's message in which he called for improved inter-Korean relations. Defense Ministry spokesperson Kim Min-seok shed more light on Pyongyang's possible motivations, saying the North frequently takes a softer line with the South when faced with hardships, but tends to act more belligerently when things don't work out as planned. Staying with North Korea, and the United States says the main focus of its North Korea policy in the new year will continue to be the denuclearization of the regime. At a regular press briefing Thursday local time, U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Mary Harf said Washington will continue to make decisions based upon Pyongyang's actions, not its words. Harf declined to analyze North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's New Year's message, but did say the U.S. is constantly consulting with China on the issue. As for Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit to the Yasukuni Shrine, honoring war criminals in Tokyo, Harf said Washington has been urging Japan to solve historical issues with its neighbors in an amicable manner. South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se is scheduled to meet with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Washington next week to discuss the diplomatic situation in Northeast Asia. After a year of intense political wrangling in which very little got done in Parliament, South Korea's ruling and main opposition parties are now setting their sights on the local elections set for June 4th. Our political correspondent Kim Yeon-ji reports on the party's efforts to win back the hearts of voters.
The ruling Sinuri Party is determined to win a landslide victory in the June local elections, in which more than 3,900 local government seats are up for grabs. It plans to harness all party resources and energy for the elections in a bid to empower the Park Geun-hye administration. As the first regional elections under the Park administration, the June elections will serve as an interim evaluation of her presidency.
It's time for us to pull up our collars and approach the public with a humble heart and integrity. We must make 2014 a year that guarantees a bright future for the party.
The stakes are particularly high for the main opposition Democratic Party, which suffered a string of election defeats. It plans to appeal to voters by accusing the Park administration of worsening the people's livelihoods and the nation's democracy.
In addition to protecting democracy and the people's livelihoods, we need an election victory this brand new year.
The Democratic Party recognizes the need for all-out reform and strengthened internal unity, as it has not only the ruling party to battle, but also a new party led by independent lawmaker An Chol-soo. An is pushing ahead with plans to form a third party that he says will overcome the old politics of the two-party system. His new party is fast gaining popularity in the southwestern Honam region, which has long been the Democratic Party's traditional power base.
The old system and way of thinking that wants to keep its vested rights by settling for regionalism and refusing to perform itself while talking down on the other must be eradicated starting in the Honam region.
An's new party is sure to split the opposition vote, but An has stressed that he won't merge with others, like he did in the 2012 presidential election when he unsuccessfully joined with the DP to try and get their candidate Moon Jae-in elected president. Kim Hyun-ji, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government held its first meeting of 2014 on Thursday in Korea's central administrative city of Sejong. Hwang Ji-ae has more on how the year-old city is moving closer to becoming the country's main admin hub.
The Korean government held its first meeting of the new year on Thursday in the central city of Sejong. It was the first time the meeting was held in the new administrative city. The meeting led by Prime Minister Chung Hong-won was also broadcast live at the central government complex in Seoul. The government's annual New Year's meeting has been held in Seoul for the past 40 years, but starting this year, it will take place at the government complex in Sejong. Around 600 officials that represent government entities in the new administrative hub took part in the meeting. Prime Minister Chung said the nation's administrative system is at a turning point.
Despite the difficulties we face with the government office relocation plan, we should consider this as a chance to advance the nation's administrative system.
Around 10,000 officials from 31 ministries and state agencies, including the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Ministry, are now working in Sejong following the second phase of a government office relocation plan that wrapped up last December. The new administrative center is the legacy of an election pledge by the late President Roh Moo-hyun in the early 2000s that aims to diminish the focus on the nation's capital and achieve balanced regional development. Hwang Ji-ae, ARIRANG News.
At the nation's presidential office, President Park Geun-hye has no plans, at this point at least, to reshuffle her cabinet. At an emergency news conference on Thursday, Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun refuted speculation that the president could replace some underperforming ministers in her second year in office. The presidential office reportedly called the press conference out of concern the rumors would distract ministry officials at the start of the new year. Political watchers, however, took note of Kim's choice of words in the press conference, as he said there were no plans right now for a reshuffle, possibly leaving the door open for one further down the line. 3 of Korea's nuclear reactors will soon resume operations, tempering fears of a nationwide power shortage this winter. The Nuclear Safety and Security Commission approved the resumption of the Shin-gori reactors 1 and 2 and the Shin-Wol-song reactor number 1. The 3 have been sitting idle since May after safety certificates for control cables were found to have been faked. Now, with newly replaced cables in place and after regular checkups, the 3 reactors are expected to be fully operational by the end of next week. Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok has expressed concerns about the weakening Japanese yen. Speaking with reporters on Thursday, Hyun promised to support small and medium-sized businesses in 2014 so they can weather the impact of currency fluctuations. The minister added that he would rather reduce existing tax breaks than actually raise taxes. Hyun also emphasized that this year's economic policies will focus on boosting domestic demand so regular working people can feel the benefits of economic growth. A number of sweeping changes to Korea's financial sector are in the pipeline for this year, as the nation aims to provide consumers a friendlier and safer environment to carry out their day-to-day banking activities. Yulian reports.
These are the fake 10 billion won checks that were cashed in the middle of last year. A jaw-dropping incident that proved that forgery on a large scale is still possible to this day. 10 billion won translates to roughly $10 million. To prevent further counterfeit checks, financial authorities have decided to adopt new security-enhanced designs.
We have made the letters that read cashier's check change color. Depending on which angle it's looked at, the letters will be either purple or green.
At the beginning of next month, ATM machines will no longer accept magnetic stripe cards. People will have to use what's called integrated circuit cards, or IC cards, to prevent people from using magnetic stripe cards that were duplicated from the original. As for cash advances, the terminology will change. Cash advance services using credit cards will now be called short-term card loans. This is to make it clear to consumers that the service is a type of a loan and not a cash withdrawal service. Now, 2014 also proves to be a better year for those that own domestic automobiles. Auto insurance for domestic cars will be slashed by an average of 2.9%, while those that own imported cars will pay more by an average of 11.3%. Finally, financial authorities have strengthened the penalty for accounting fraud. Presidents of companies or executive-level personnel found guilty now face up to 7 years in prison and $65,000 in fines. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
The nation's state-run rail operator is making headway in normalizing train services following a 22-day union strike that ended earlier this week. Co-rail operated services were running at just 75% of normal capacity on Thursday, which was the first official workday of the year, although all union workers were back on the job. Subway services in the Seoul metropolitan area are scheduled to be back to normal on January 6th. All other train services will be running at 100% by January 14th. Train ticket reservations for the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday will begin next Tuesday. As planned, Co-Rail CEO Park Geun-hye says that in order to regain the people's trust, disciplinary action must be sought against those responsible for leading the strike. In international news, more than 20 people were killed in 2 separate attacks in Iraq Thursday, in yet another sign extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda are making a resurgence in the country. Officials say a truck bombing killed at least 19 in a city north of Baghdad as security forces and allied tribesmen battled to put down an uprising by Al-Qaeda-linked militants. In a separate attack, a minibus exploded in Baghdad, killing 4 and wounding 6. The violence has intensified since April after the Shia-led government launched a deadly crackdown on a Sunni protest camp, and clashes continue between army and Sunni fighters after government seized control of several police stations. Heavy fighting has also been raging in Anbar province since Monday. Earlier this week, the United Nations said over 7,800 Iraqi civilians were killed in violent attacks in 2013, the highest annual death toll in years. Staying in the region, at least 5 people have been killed after a suspected car bomb exploded in a southern suburb of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. The Lebanese health minister confirmed that 5 people died and at least 66 were injured in Thursday's attack on a largely Hezbollah-held district. Beirut has been hit by a wave of bomb attacks in recent months, including one last week, which killed former finance minister Mohammed Chattar, a political adversary of Hezbollah and its ally, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In November, more than 20 people were killed by suicide bombers at the Iranian embassy in southern Beirut, and explosions have also rocked other nearby Hezbollah districts and Sunni mosques in the northern city of Tripoli. Conflict in Syria has polarized Lebanon and ratcheted up sectarian tensions in the country. South Sudan's army is making ground on 2 rebel-controlled towns as the 2 warring sides gather in Ethiopia for peace talks when the 3 weeks of violence which has now killed more than 1,000 people and displaced nearly 200,000. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir has declared a state of emergency in 2 states, whose respective provincial capitals are now in the hands of militia loyal to former Vice President Riek Machar. Rebel negotiators are already in Addis Ababa, but only half of the government's delegation is present. The remainder are due in the city any time now. There is growing international pressure on both sides to strike a peace deal as soon as possible. The White House says those found guilty of atrocities and war crimes will be held accountable. Dozens of scientists and tourists who spent over 1 week aboard a vessel trapped in Antarctic ice have been rescued, following an international effort that had been thwarted multiple times due to the region's extremely unforgiving climate. 52 people who were left stranded in Antarctica over Christmas and the New Year were safely rescued by a helicopter from a Chinese icebreaker. The group were then taken to an Australian supply ship. The Russian research vessel got trapped in a thick ice floe on Christmas Eve while it was making its way towards Antarctica. The 22-member crew is staying aboard the Russian ship as it is not in imminent danger, but it does still remain immobile. Back here in Korea, and hospitals in the country are reporting a surging number of flu patients, with health authorities issuing a nationwide influenza warning. Doctors say the best means of defense is still to get a flu shot, but even that might not stop you falling foul of the virus. Paul Lee reports.
Here in Seoul, a local medical clinic has been experiencing a sharp spike in patients suffering from high fevers, chills, and other flu-like symptoms. Freezing temperatures over the past few weeks have exacerbated conditions for potential influenza infections, with young children and senior citizens at the highest risk of complications.
Due to my severe condition, I collapsed. I couldn't even get up in the middle of the night.
Korea is expected to boast the highest rate of flu vaccinations in recent years, with about 15 million people getting vaccinated this winter. Even though annual flu shots remain the most effective way to reduce your chances of infection, they don't guarantee protection from every viral strain. Doctors say it's also important to recognize flu symptoms from that of a common cold, as the virus can leave your body vulnerable to secondary infections such as pneumonia.
In the case of a persistent fever and worsening symptoms, you may in fact be suffering from influenza. Since there is a chance of catching secondary pneumonia, it's best to first go to a hospital and get diagnosed.
In addition to vaccines, strict personal hygiene is your next best bet in preventing the spread of the influenza virus. Wearing masks when going outside is recommended, as well as frequently and thoroughly washing your hands with soap. Paul Yi, ARIRANG News.
And a good Friday morning to you all as we kick things off with the South Korean national football team. Now, with all the overseas players headed over to their respective clubs, players from the K-League Classic and the J-League will be headed overseas in preparation for the World Cup. Now, starting on the 13th of this month, Hong Myung-bo and crew will be headed over to Brazil to kick off their training before making their stops in Costa Rica, Mexico, and the United States. Now, the team will return to Korea on February 3rd, with Gwangju Evergrande's Kim Young-won deciding not to take part in this training. Meanwhile, a couple of players will be joining the squad for the first time. And shifting over to the majors, where the latest fantasy baseball rankings had the 2 Korean players ranked in the top 100. Now, the newest member of the Texas Rangers and 32-year-old Choo Shin-soo is ranked 36th in the MLB fantasy ranking, while Lee Hyun-jin of the LA Dodgers is ranked 98th overall. Now, fantasy baseball is a game where people manage a roster of Major League Baseball players, with the participants competing against one another, using those players' real-life statistics to score points. Now, the fantasy ranking shows how good a player is in the actual season. And moving on, good news for all you mixed martial arts fans out here in the nation. Now, we might finally have a UFC event here in the nation. Now, according to Mark Fisher, the UFC rep for Asia, Korea might host their very first UFC event late this year, or at least at the latest early next year. Now, with more and more Korean fighters joining the UFC and the growing number of people watching the UFC here in the nation, Korea is becoming an attractive destination for a UFC event. And while the actual date hasn't been set, Fisher stated that because of names like Chung Chang-sung and Kim Dong-hyun, ticket sales won't be a problem here in Korea. And moving on to some Thursday night's KBL action, we had one game that took place last night as Ulsan Mobis Phoebus took on Jeonju KCC Aegis. So let's take a look at the highlights. Now, first quarter of the game, Mobis off to a nice start here, take a 20-17 lead before Tyler Wilkerson leads the way for KCC as KCC rallied back to tie this game at 43 going into halftime. But in the third quarter of the game, Mobis offense lights it up here, outscoring KCC 26-19. And despite Wilkerson finishing off the game with game-high 29 points and 10 rebounds, Mobis hangs on to take this game 89-84. And now finishing things off in the V-League, we had one game take place as well as Kepco Vicstorm took on Russian Cash Vespit, so let's take a look at the highlights. Now going into the game here, Kepco looking to end their losing streak as they powered through in the first set, 26-24. But the red-hot Russian Cash bounced back in the next three sets, sweeping the last three sets 25-19, 25-20, and 26-24. With Arpat Baroti putting up 28 points, Song Myung-geuk 18 points, and Kim Gyu-min with 14, as Russian Cash escaped last place with a 3-1 victory. Well, with all that said, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great weekend, everyone, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
And time now to check in on the weather conditions in Korea and around the world. And that's all for now. Have a fabulous rest of the day, and we do hope to see you back again, though, for our next newscast. That's coming up at noon, Korea time.